Welcome. Today, we're going to unpack a really powerful framework for teaching reading. We'll dig into what the real goals of a reading program should be and look at all the different ways we can use texts in the classroom. This is all based on some fantastic expert insights. So, you ready? Let's dive in. But first, let's start with a question, one that might just challenge a pretty common assumption. When we give our students a text to read, is the goal for them to understand every single word? I mean, is 100% comprehension really what we're shooting for? Just keep that question in the back of your mind as we go. Okay, so let's get started with how we actually use a text in the classroom. You can think of this next part as a kind of teacher's toolkit. For any given article, story, or whatever you're using, we can look at it through three totally distinct lenses, and each one has a very different purpose. Now, this table breaks down three key approaches, first laid out by the researchers Johns and Davies. Let's walk through them. All right, first up, you've got TALO, which stands for Text as a Linguistic Object. Here, the text is basically a goldmine for language. We're hunting for specific grammar points or vocabulary. So an example task would be something simple like, find all the crime-related words. Makes sense. Next is TAVI, or Text as a Vehicle for Information. Now, the whole point here is to actually unlock the meaning of the text itself. A task might be to discuss the writer's attitude about the topic. And finally, we have TASP, Text as a Springboard for Production. This is where you use the text as a launchpad to get students speaking or writing themselves. For instance, you could ask them to debate the reasons for the writer's attitude. See? Three different lenses, three very different outcomes. So what's the big takeaway from all that? Well, while all three of these approaches are super useful in their own way, if our main goal is to build strong, independent readers, then our focus has to be on TAV. It's all about teaching students how to read for meaning, not just mining the text for language points. So we've covered the how, but what about the why? This brings us to the bigger picture. What are the ultimate long-term goals of any really effective reading program? What are we trying to achieve here? Turns out there are 5 core aims. A truly successful reading program should get learners to a point where they can read authentic texts, where they can do it without your help, where they can read at a good speed, where they can read silently, and finally, where they can read with adequate understanding. These 5 aims are the pillars for everything else we're going to talk about. So let's really dig into those first 2 aims, authenticity and independence. This is where the theory gets real, you know? It's where we meet the challenges of an actual day-to-day classroom. You know, the word authentic is actually a little more complex than it sounds. First, there's text authenticity. Basically, is the text exactly as it appeared in the real world, unchanged? The second we simplify it, well, that authenticity goes down. But then there's learner authenticity. This is about whether students are using the text for its original purpose. If you're using a travel brochure to hunt for adjectives instead of, planning a trip, the way you're using it isn't very authentic, is it? And this right here, this is the classic dilemma every teacher faces when a text is just too hard. Do you grade the text, meaning you simplify the words, which of course hurts text authenticity? Or do you grade the task? You keep the complex text but ask for something super simple, like finding a single date, which then hurts the learner authenticity. It is always a trade-off. So let's say you decide to grade the text. Here are 3 common ways to handle those blocking words, the ones that stop comprehension dead in its tracks. Imagine your text uses the word relocated. Okay, so you could gloss it. Just add a simple footnote. Or you could pre-teach it, maybe by breaking it down into re and locate before they even start reading. Or you could just replace it with a simpler word like moved, though you do risk making the text feel a little less natural that way. And what about that big goal of independence? Well, it's really not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Some learners, they just need survival skills, right? Reading timetables, road signs. Others need what we could call a measure of integration. They need to handle emails, social media posts, and then a smaller group might need full independence to tackle dense academic texts. The key is to match the training to what the learner actually needs to do in the real world. All right, let's move on to our next 2 aims. These focus on parts of skilled reading that are absolutely critical but are honestly often overlooked: speed and silence. 200 words per minute. Now, that number isn't just pulled out of thin air. It's widely seen as the threshold for fluent reading. It's the speed where your brain can finally stop decoding individual letters and starts recognizing whole words on sight. Once you cross this line, real comprehension can actually start to happen. And this is exactly why speed matters so much. As the researcher Christine Nuttall described it, it's a vicious circle.
You read slowly to try and understand every single word, which makes you frustrated because it takes forever, which makes you want to avoid reading so you never get any faster. It's a trap. And it's why telling a struggling student to just slow down can actually be the worst advice you can give.
This all leads to another big problem, what you could call the sound barrier. Reading out loud, or vocalization, it feels like it's helping, but it is a massive drag on your speed. And the same thing goes for its quieter cousin, subvocalization. You know, that little voice in your head that sounds out all the words as you go. Both of these habits are like hitting the brakes on your brain, stealing energy that should be going towards actually understanding the meaning.
So how can we help our learners break that speed barrier? Well, here are 3 really simple drills you can try. First, stepping up the pace. Have them read a text in 1-minute bursts, trying to get just a little bit further each time. Second, repeat reading. They read the same short paragraph over and over, but you give them a slightly tighter time limit each attempt. And third, individual targets. Get each student to aim for improving their own personal speed by a set amount, say 10%. That way, the goal feels achievable for everyone, no matter where they're starting from.
And that brings us to our 5th and final aim, which is really the one that ties this whole thing together: understanding. We've talked about authenticity, independence, and speed. But what does it actually look like?
Hey, remember that question from the very beginning about 100% comprehension? Well, this is where we get our answer. The goal isn't perfection, it's adequate understanding. But what on earth does adequate actually mean?
It means enough for your purpose. It all depends on the task. If you're checking your flight information, yeah, you need 100% comprehension. You really don't want to get that gate number wrong. But if you're just reading a detective story for fun, maybe 60% understanding is totally fine to follow the plot. And if you're just skimming a newspaper to get the gist of what's happening, 20% might be all you need.
And here it is. This might just be the most liberating fact in this entire explainer. Research shows that even fluent native speakers only average around 70% comprehension in most normal, everyday reading. The hunt for 100% isn't just unrealistic. It's not even how good readers actually read. So setting a 70% success mark in the classroom, that's not lowering the bar. It's setting a realistic, motivating, and authentic target.
So let's end with this one idea. The goal isn't to create perfect readers who catch every single word. It's to create smart, adaptable, strategic readers who know how to get what they need from a text for the task at hand. Because the real goal isn't 100% comprehension. It's adequate understanding for the purpose. And that simple shift in perspective can make all the difference. Thanks for joining me.